Hey guys, tonight we begin with something colder than your ex's heart. Winter as a medieval peasant. No, not the Renaissance fair version with turkey legs and jousting tournaments. I'm talking about the real Middle Ages, the gritty, frostbitten, genuinely miserable experience of surviving medieval Europe. A time of plagues, punishments, and pottage. We're diving into what life was really like during the Middle Ages. Forget the castles and chivalry Hollywood sold you. The truth? You probably wouldn't last a single day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Somehow, it's always 2 a.m. somewhere. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Have you ever wondered what medieval life actually felt like? Did people ever take a hot bath? How did they survive winter without central heating, fleece jackets, or those fuzzy socks you got for Christmas? What did they eat when the harvest failed? Did medieval peasants ever get a day off? Or was rest just a fancy word for too sick to stand? Could you survive a week without coffee? Without antibiotics? Without anyone to complain to who might actually care? Would you last a day hauling water from a frozen well while your lord sat by the fire eating cheese you made? What about entertainment? Was there anything to do? Or did people just stare at walls and pray for spring? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1347. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? So are the fleas. Your bed is a half-rotted straw mattress stuffed with bugs and hay that smells like a barn floor because it was a barn floor 3 months ago. There's no memory foam, no pillows, and definitely no Egyptian cotton sheets. Just a wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter and now weighs roughly as much as a small cow from the accumulated grime. Good luck. You blink awake as the church bell clangs in the distance. It's the medieval version of an alarm clock, only louder and somehow even less merciful. Your home is a wooden hut with one room, no windows, and a charming open-concept floor plan where your family, livestock, and domestic insects all share the same space. The smell? Oh, it's a fragrant symphony. A subtle blend of stale beer, human sweat, goat, and something you pray isn't mold, but know in your soul probably is. Scented candles haven't been invented, and even if they were, they'd just melt on your dirt floor. You try to stretch, but immediately regret it because the air is freezing and your joints ache like you've been sleeping on a pile of firewood. Which, technically, you have been. Your bed is a straw-stuffed. Mattress and mattress is a generous term that hasn't been changed since the last time someone in your family died on it. The straw is damp, flattened, and home to a small ecosystem of fleas, lice, and things that crunch when you roll over. Every morning begins with the sensation of something crawling across your ankle. You've stopped checking what it is. You've made peace with it. Sort of. Getting out of bed is a gamble. The floor is either wet from last night's rain, which leaks through the thatched roof like a sieve, or crusty from something your neighbor's chicken did. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the ecosystem. There's no alarm snooze button. There's no coffee waiting. There's just the distant clanging of church bells, reminding you that God is awake and expects you to be productive. The roosters outside aren't crowing. They're screaming, like tiny feathered demons who also hate mornings. Privacy? What's that? Your entire family, and maybe a random cousin who just never left, are waking up beside you. There's no bedroom, no curtains, no me time. Just communal everything. Your mother is already up, poking at last night's fire, trying to coax some warmth from the dying embers. Your father is coughing in the corner, a sound so familiar it barely registers anymore. Your younger brother has somehow ended up sleeping on the goat. No one comments on this. It's just another Tuesday in medieval Europe. The light filtering through the gaps in the walls is gray and reluctant, like even the sun doesn't want to be here. You stumble toward the fire pit, hoping there's something warm to drink. There isn't. There's water from the bucket, which has a film on top that you've learned not to examine too closely. You drink it anyway, because hydration is hydration, and the alternative is waiting until someone fetches more from the well, which won't happen until after chores. And chores start now. Your clothes, if you can call them that, are exactly where you left them. In a pile on the floor, slightly damp, vaguely crusty, and smelling like a barn that lost a fight with a compost heap. You pull on your tunic, wincing as the rough wool scrapes against yesterday's bug bites. The fabric is stiff in places, soft in others, and universally uncomfortable. Somewhere outside, a pig squeals. A dog barks. A child cries. The symphony of medieval morning life is in full swing. And this is just the beginning. You haven't eaten yet. You haven't worked yet. You haven't even faced the horror of the communal toilet situation, which we'll get to shortly. But already, your body aches, your stomach growls, and your soul quietly wonders what it did in a past life to deserve this. Was it something terrible? Probably. Because this cold, damp, itchy, smelly existence feels a lot like purgatory. Except purgatory probably has better ventilation. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe, where you're never truly alone, because parasites, rodents, and 8 other people are always with you. Where comfort is a foreign concept, privacy is a myth, and the day has only just begun. You take a deep breath, immediately regret it, and step outside into the gray, unforgiving light. Let the suffering commence. So you've managed to crawl out of your medieval haystack of horrors. Congrats. Now nature calls. And it's not calling politely. It's screaming. Here's the part where you start missing the modern bathroom. There's no toilet, no seat, no toilet paper, no flush, not even a mildly resentful plunger in the corner. In the 14th century, relieving yourself is an adventure, a social experiment, and often a small public event. If you're a peasant, your bathroom is likely a wooden bucket behind the house, which is already full, because Uncle Wolfstan had a rough night after eating bad turnips. The smell is biblical. You hold your breath, do your business, and then here's the kicker toss it into the street. Yes, the street. You're supposed to shout something like, "Gardy Lou," before dumping it out the window. That's Old French for watch out below. Although, frankly, no one ever moves fast enough. The streets below are already rivers of human waste, animal droppings, and mystery liquids you'd rather not examine. Walking through a medieval town isn't a stroll. It's an obstacle course. In sandals, with no socks, and questionable ankle support. If you're lucky enough to live in a town with public latrines, congratulations. You get to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers at an outhouse where privacy is a myth and ventilation is a cruel joke. You might make small talk, but try not to breathe too deeply. The latrines are usually just wooden planks over a pit, and that pit hasn't been emptied since the last king died. The flies alone could carry you away. They buzz around your head like tiny, disgusting helicopters, and swatting them is pointless. They always come back. They always win. Toilet paper? Never heard of it. Most people wipe with straw, leaves, rags, moss, or if they're feeling especially indulgent, a scrap of wool. Sometimes nothing at all, which might explain why handshakes weren't exactly popular yet. And if you think that's rough, consider this. The wealthy wiped with scraps of linen. The truly elite used small sponges on sticks, shared communally. Yes, shared. Rinsed in a bucket of vinegar or salt water between uses. Let that sink in. Let it really marinate. That sponge has seen things. And if you're in a castle, surely it's better, right? Well, sort of. You might have a garderobe, a small stone chamber, jutting out from the castle wall, with a hole that drops your waist directly into the moat below. Great idea, except that your enemies know this. And yes, attackers sometimes climbed in through the waste chute during sieges. Talk about entering through the back door. Security risk aside, the smell in those stone chambers was legendary. Castles may look romantic in movies, but trust me, they smelled like medieval porta-potties marinated in centuries of regret. For the average peasant, though, your options are limited. You might use the woods if you're rural, squatting behind a tree while hoping no wolves are watching. You might dig a pit behind your hut if you're slightly more civilized, a hole in the ground covered with a plank, if you're lucky. But wherever you go, there's no escaping the reality. Medieval sanitation was a horror show. One slip on a wet stone path, and you're face first in humanity's leftovers. One wrong step, and your day gets significantly worse. And here's the thing, no one talks about it. It's just life. Everyone deals with it. Everyone smells it. Everyone pretends it's normal. Because it is normal. This is the world you live in. A world where the concept of fresh air is laughable, where clean is a relative term, and where your morning routine involves things no modern human should ever have to contemplate. You wipe your hands on your tunic, the same tunic you'll wear all week, and head back inside. The bucket remains, waiting for the next unfortunate soul. The street below continues its slow transformation into an open sewer. And somewhere, a pig is rooting through something that used to be someone's dinner. This is sanitation, medieval style. It's not pretty. It's not pleasant. But it's all you've got. And you still haven't brushed your teeth. But we'll get to that next. You survived the toilet. You deserve a reward, right? Maybe a nice breakfast. Something warm, delicious, comforting. Sorry, this is medieval Europe. Nothing is comforting here. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a grim affair. There are no eggs Benedict, no coffee machine sputtering awake, and certainly no avocado toast. You sit down or squat near the fire to a wooden bowl of something that looks like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily ration of pottage. Pottage is a thick, gloopy stew made of whatever you can find. Grains, root vegetables, maybe a few beans if you're lucky. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks, and new ingredients are just dumped on top of the old ones. It's less of a recipe and more of an ongoing edible experiment. Think of it as medieval meal prep, Except no one's posting it on Instagram, because everyone's too busy not dying. The texture is somewhere between oatmeal and wallpaper paste. The taste is somewhere between acceptable and deeply suspicious. You eat it anyway. You don't have a choice. On the side, there's a hunk of bread so hard it could deflect arrows. It's made from coarse rye or barley flour, often bulked up with sawdust, ground up acorns, or other creative ingredients because wheat is a rich man's fantasy. This loaf is not your friend. You don't slice it. You negotiate with it. Your teeth grind against the grit, baked into every bite a lovely side effect of stone ground, flour mixed with whatever debris fell into the mill. Dentists would weep if dentists existed, which they don't. So your teeth just suffer in silence, like everything else. What about drinks? You're not sipping orange juice or an oat milk latte. You're drinking beer. Yes, beer. At 6 a.m., why? Because the water is teeming with parasites and filth, and beer, specifically weak, watery small beer, has been boiled during brewing, making it marginally safer. So you start your day with ale. Low alcohol, high survivability. Kids drink it too. Your grandmother drinks it. The priest drinks it. Everyone drinks it. No one's happy about it, but at least it won't kill you immediately. Probably. Want some meat or cheese? Dream on. That's for Sundays and saints' feast days, and only if your Lord is feeling generous, which he usually isn't. Most peasants don't eat meat more than a few times a year. Maybe a bit of salted pork if you're lucky. A chicken if someone died and left one behind. But fresh meat? Roasted beef? Forget it. That's for people who own castles and have last names. As for fresh fruit, only when it's in season and not already fermented into something else. Apples, pears, berries, if they haven't rotted, been eaten by birds, or been claimed by the Lord's kitchen. And don't even think about spices unless you're royalty. A pinch of pepper costs more than your monthly wages. Cinnamon? Nutmeg? Those are basically medieval Bitcoin valuable, rare, and completely out of reach. Salt is valuable enough to be locked away. If you're lucky, you might have access to some, but it's precious. It preserves food, adds flavor, and reminds you that something in life can taste like more than bland misery. Most peasants season their food with whatever herbs grow wild, if they can find them, and if no one else has picked them first. So you chew your gritty bread, gulp your medieval beer, and try not to think about the rat that may have nibbled your porridge in the night. The bread crunches. The pottage squelches. Your stomach makes a noise that's either gratitude or protest, hard to tell. Breakfast doesn't energize you. It just happens to you. It's fuel, nothing more. Enough to keep you standing for the next 14 hours of labor, Doc. And now that you're properly underfed, it's time to work like your life depends on it. Because it absolutely does. So you've eaten your sad medieval breakfast, and now it's time to get dressed. Not that it'll help. Your wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. One. It's a rough wool tunic, or linen shift that you've worn every day for months, possibly years. There's no such thing as seasonal fashion. There's just wear this until it disintegrates, or gives you a fungal infection. Underwear? Optional. If you're lucky, maybe a linen under tunic. If you're not, well, you're going commando under layers of scratchy, sweaty wool, all lovingly stitched together by someone who probably had no idea what a seam was supposed to look like. There's also no washing machine. No soap, at least not the kind you'd recognize, and absolutely no dry cleaner in sight. So your clothes are stained, stiff, and scented like a compost pile that's been left to marinate in a pigsty. Even if you wanted to wash them, it's not easy. You'd have to haul water from a river or well, heat it over a fire, scrub your tunic on a board with ashes or lye, and hang it in the sun, which is out approximately 3 days a year in England. And even then, the clothes never really get clean. They just get less offensive, temporarily. And let's not get started on shoes. If you own any, they're made of untreated leather, barely stitched together, and offer as much arch support as a banana peel. Most peasants just go barefoot through mud, through dung, through medieval landmines, aka sharp rocks and diseased puddles. Your feet are essentially hardened leather at this point. Blisters aren't a concern anymore. They've become part of your personality. Calluses are your only defense. And even they're losing the war. All this means one thing. Your skin hates you. You itch constantly. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs live rent-free on your body. Everyone has them: nobles, monks, children, livestock. No one escapes. You'll be scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon while chatting with the local priest. And no one will even bat an eye, because everyone's doing the same thing. It's not weird. It's just life. Your skin is raw from rubbing. Your scalp is a battlefield of bites. Tiny red welts cover your ankles, your wrists, your everywhere. And if you develop a rash, well, too bad. There's no dermatologist, no hydrocortisone, no one to tell you it's probably scabies. You just keep on suffering. And if you're lucky enough not to get an infection, great. That rash will simply accompany you for the next 6 months, like an unwanted medieval sidekick. A constant, itchy reminder that comfort is for other centuries. Clothing in the Middle Ages wasn't about self-expression. It was about survival, and barely that. You wore what you had, repaired what you could, and prayed your tunic didn't fall apart during harvest season. Fashion was for nobles, and even their outfits came with lice. The only difference was the lice had better taste. Layering was common in winter, not for style, but for warmth. You'd pile on everything you owned, tunic over tunic, cloak over cloak, until you resembled a walking laundry pile. And still, you'd be cold. Still, you'd be damp. Still, you'd be itching. Your fingers would be numb. Your nose would be running. And your toes would feel like frozen pebbles shoved into leather sacks. Summer brought different problems. The wool trapped heat. You'd sweat through your layers, but couldn't remove them because showing too much skin was scandalous. So you suffered in silence, damp and sticky, while flies circled your head like you were their personal landing strip. Now that you're dressed in misery and wrapped in discomfort, it's time to head outside and start working yourself to death. Now that you're fully dressed in leeches and damp wool, it's time to flash that morning smile. Except you don't. Because in the Middle Ages, smiling is a dangerous game. Not emotionally, dentally. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. The concept of oral hygiene is about as popular as bathing, which is to say, not very. Some people might chew on a twig or rinse with wine or vinegar, but for the most part, your teeth are on their own, and they're not doing well. By the time you hit your mid-20s, your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt. Cavities are rampant. Gums are swollen and bleeding. And those aren't just food stains on your teeth. That's decay. Actual rot. You have more decay in your mouth than a medieval root cellar. The bread you eat every day, full of sand and grit from the grinding stones. Each bite is like chewing on a beach. Your enamel doesn't stand a chance. It wears down year after year, leaving your teeth flat, sensitive, and vulnerable to every infection imaginable. Sugar, while not yet everywhere, is becoming more common among the rich, imported at great cost, and used in small cakes and sweetened wines to show off wealth. If you're a noble, congratulations. You get to rot your teeth faster than the peasants. Sweetened treats are a status symbol, which means the wealthiest smiles are often the worst. If you're poor, you'll rot your teeth slowly over time with fermented bread, gritty porridge, and years of hard chewing. Either way, the result is the same: a mouthful of pain. Toothaches? Get used to them. They're like medieval weather, always there in the background. The kind of pain that makes you consider praying, drinking, or pulling the tooth out yourself with a pair of pliers. And that's not a joke. That was the actual treatment. Dentists didn't really exist, but barber surgeons did. Yes, the same guy who cuts your hair is also pulling your molars out like candlelight with an iron hook and zero anesthesia. Hope you like screaming. Hope you like the taste of blood and the smell of burning herbs meant to calm the spirits. Infected tooth? Hope you like fevers. Because without antibiotics, a dental infection can easily spread to your jaw, your blood, your brain. It can turn into sepsis and kill you. That's right. The same thing that sends us to a pharmacy today could be your funeral in the 1300s. A toothache wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a potential death sentence. And everyone knew someone who died from one. Everyone had a cousin, a neighbor, a friend who went to sleep with a swollen jaw and never woke up. And there's no relief on the social front either. Kissing? Good luck. Halitosis bad breath is everywhere. It's unavoidable. It's universal. If you're single, you're not judged by your smile. You're judged by your land and livestock. Romance in the Middle Ages had nothing to do with fresh breath and everything to do with property. Some people tried remedies. Chewing mint leaves, rubbing sage on gums, rinsing with honey water. These helped a little, maybe, but they couldn't undo years of damage. They couldn't fix the cracks, the rot, the infections already spreading through your jawbone. They were bandages on a catastrophe. In short, your mouth is a battlefield, and it's losing the war. Every chew, every bite, every morning brings you closer to another cavity, another infection, another visit to the barber surgeon's blood-stained chair. Now that your teeth are throbbing, let's head outside. Because your real job, the one that will break your back, is just getting started. Time to head to work. Except there's no office, no desk, no coffee break, and no chance of promotion. Your job, if you're like 90% of the population, is simple. Don't die while laboring for someone else's comfort. You're a peasant. Congratulations. That means you work the land that belongs to a lord who probably doesn't remember your name. You rise with the sun and stop only when it disappears behind the trees. Your tools? A wooden hoe, a rusty sickle, and whatever bones are still intact in your body. There's no weekend. There's no clocking out. There's only sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week. Sunday is off, but only if you're not harvesting, fighting off raiders, or praying feverishly for your infected toe to stop turning black. The work is brutal. Fields are plowed by hand or with oxen, if you're rich enough to afford one. You dig ditches, sow seeds, pull weeds, and carry water until your spine begins to resemble the letter S. No one cares if you're tired. No one's asking how your mental health is doing. If you're a woman, surprise, you don't just do field work. You also care for children, clean, cook, spin wool, feed animals, and pretend your husband's lice infestation isn't slowly migrating to your side of the bed. Your break is when the baby naps for 7 minutes while you prepare dinner. Women in the Middle Ages worked from before dawn until after dark, and their labor was invisible, unpaid, and endless. Children, they start helping out around age 5. No school, no toys, just a tiny wooden rake and a dream of one day not dying of the flu. Childhood in the Middle Ages is short, dirty, and largely indistinguishable from adulthood. You work because everyone works. That's the deal. And if you're one of the few who isn't a farmer, maybe you're a blacksmith, a tanner, or a cooper grate, you still work with fire, chemicals, or animal guts all day in poorly ventilated sheds. Blacksmiths breathe smoke and metal dust. Tanners soak hides in urine and animal brains. Coopers hammer barrels until their hands are raw. The pay? Basically survival. The perks? Occasional bleeding. Break a bone? Too bad. Get a fever? Drink some warm beer and keep going. You can't afford to stop now, even for a day. Because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, well, medieval Europe has a solution for that. It's called bug-infested. There's always someone hungrier, more desperate, willing to take your spot. The Lord takes his cut first. A portion of everything you grow goes to him. Then the church takes its tithe. What's left, if anything, is yours. Some years, there's enough. Most years, there isn't. Famine lurks around every bad harvest, every late frost, every flood that washes away your crops. Injuries are common. Backs give out. Fingers get crushed. Infections spread. There's no workers' compensation, no disability pay, no retirement plan. You work until your body fails, and then you hope your children can keep the farm running without you. So you grip your shovel, ignore the blisters, and keep digging. Your hands are calloused. Your shoulders ache. Your stomach growls. But you keep going, because in the Middle Ages, your job isn't a career. It's a slow-motion endurance test. And the only way out is death. If you thought being a medieval peasant was rough, just wait until you realize that complaining isn't just frowned upon. It's potentially treason. Why? Because your boss isn't just a ruler. He's a literal god. Well, not a god exactly, but close enough. Your Lord holds the power of life and death over you. Questioning his authority isn't just rude, it's dangerous. Speaking ill of him could land you a date with a whip, a set of shackles, or an early trip to a very shallow grave. The king, of course, sits at the very top, divinely appointed, anointed by the church, and convinced that God personally handed him the crown. Beneath him are the lords, barons, and nobles, each ruling their little chunk of the kingdom like miniature tyrants. They decide when you work, what you grow, how much you keep, and whether your village gets raided this month or next. You see their faces on coins, on tapestries, on the occasional decree nailed to the church door. Their names are chanted in prayers. Their images are painted larger than everyone else's in every mural. That's not artistic exaggeration. That's law. The Lord is more important than you. Literally, his life is worth more. His comfort matters more. His horse eats better than your children. And don't expect to ever meet them. If you're a commoner, the closest you'll get is watching a royal procession pass by while you stand in the mud with your hat in your hands. Blink and they're gone back to a castle you'll never enter, surrounded by guards, servants, and enough roasted meat to feed your village for a month. You bow. They don't even look at you. That's the natural order of things. If you're lucky enough to work on a royal project, say, building a cathedral or digging a moat, you serve with divine joy. At least that's what you're told to feel. Pretending you're honored to haul stones for 16 hours a day is safer than the alternative. Complaints reach ears. Ears reach swords. And swords reach neck-stock rebellion? It happens, but it's crushed fast. Peasant uprisings don't usually end with freedom. They end with heads on spikes and taxes doubled. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381 ended with executions and broken promises. The German Peasants' War? Tens of thousands slaughtered. History isn't kind to those who challenge the hierarchy. The hierarchy isn't just political, it's spiritual. Your Lord is closer to God than you'll ever be. Questioning him is questioning the divine order. The church backs the nobles. The nobles back the church. Together, they form an unbreakable wall of power that keeps you exactly where you are. At the bottom dot, so you bow. You obey. You work. You keep your opinions to yourself. Because walls have ears, and ears have mouths, and mouths have a way of reaching people with swords. You've seen what happens to troublemakers. You've heard the screams. You've smelled the fires. In the Middle Ages, power isn't earned. It's inherited. And if you weren't born with it, you'll never have it. Your role is to serve. Your reward is survival. And your job is to pretend you're grateful for both. If you thought surviving under the sun was hard, just wait until you realize that in medieval times, filth is your roommate, co-worker, seasoning, and mortal enemy. It's everywhere. In your clothes, in your bed, in your food. There is no escaping it. You could be working, praying, sleeping, or minding your own business in the market. And suddenly, a gust of cold wind sweeps by and turns your face into a grimy exfoliation experiment you didn't ask for. Let's start with the streets. In towns and villages alike, roads are unpaved, just packed dirt, mud, and whatever organic matter got trampled into it. That includes animal waste, food scraps, human refuse, and the occasional dead rodent. After a rainstorm, the streets become rivers of sludge. After a dry spell, they become clouds of dust that cling to your hair, your skin, and your already questionable food. Your home offers no sanctuary. Mud brick walls crumble. Thatched roofs leak. Dirt floors absorb every spill and smell, creating a permanent aroma that can only be described as medieval essence. Cleaning is a myth. Brooms exist, but they only push the grime around. Soap is rare and expensive. Most people just coexist with the filth like it's a long-term house guest who refuses to leave. Eating? Good luck. Every meal comes with a side of grit. Since flour was ground between stone slabs, little bits of rock made their way into the dough. You're not just eating bread, you're eating the mill itself. One sandy bite at a time. Your teeth grind down year after year. Your jaw aches. But you keep chewing because the alternative is starvation. And if you thought your house was a clean zone, think again. Your furniture is minimal. Maybe a bench, a table, and a chest. All of it wooden. All of it rough. All of it hosting a population of splinters, insects, and mysterious stains you've learned to ignore. Your sleeping mat is stuffed with straw that hasn't been changed in months. It smells like it. It feels like it. It moves sometimes when the bugs are particularly active. Then there's the outdoor reality. Whether you're farming, hauling, or traveling, you're exposed to wind, rain, and everything it carries. Your clothes are always damp. Your skin is always irritated. And your hair? Let's not discuss your hair. It's matted, greasy, and probably home to things you'd rather not think about. The animals don't help. Chickens wander through your home. Pigs root through your garbage. Dogs sleep wherever they please. Their waste mingles with yours in the great democratic cesspool of medieval life. Everyone shares everything, including parasites, diseases, and an ever-present layer of grime. Bathing is rare. Water is dangerous. Soap is a luxury. So you stay dirty. You smell. Everyone smells. You've grown nose-blind to it, which is probably for the best. Because if you could truly smell yourself, you might never recover. In short, dirt is your constant companion. You can't escape it. You can only accept it. It's in your pores, under your nails, between your teeth. It's part of you now. Welcome to medieval hygiene. There is none. It's evening now. You've worked, suffered, and barely digested your suspicious stew. You might think the day is winding down, but don't get too relaxed, because God is watching. So is the priest. And so is your neighbor Agnes, who will absolutely rat you out if you miss Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just part of life. It is life. The church controls your calendar, your laws, your education, your birth, marriage, death, and everything in between. Every day is structured around prayer bells. The town church bell rings in the morning, noon, and night, not because people need reminders, but because missing prayer is a sin. Forget to bow? Sin. Eat meat on a Friday? Sin. Think about your neighbor's spouse in that one dream? Double sign. And yes, hell is very real. Vividly real. Priests describe it in glorious detail: rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, and eternal wailing. If the plague doesn't scare you, eternal damnation definitely will. You can't read the Bible yourself because it's written in Latin, a language reserved for monks, clergy, and that one noble kid who's too good for dirt. You rely on the church to interpret everything for you. That means if the priest says your crop failure is because you didn't pray hard enough, well, time to kneel harder. If the priest says your illness is punishment for sin, you confess and hope for mercy. The church is the middleman between you and God, and that middleman charges fees. Tithes 1/10 of everything you own are mandatory. If you grow wheat, you give wheat. If you raise chickens, you give eggs. If you have nothing, congratulations. You're spiritually bankrupt and financially doomed. The church isn't asking, it's collecting. And it's building cathedrals with your labor and your grain while you sleep in a mud hut. Holidays? They're holy days, dozens of them throughout the year. And while they offer breaks from labor, they're not for fun. They're for attending Mass, fasting, confessing sins, and reminding yourself that joy is a dangerous indulgence. Saints' days mean prayers. Feast days mean more prayers. Even celebrations come with guilt. Questioning the church is dangerous. Heretics are burned. Witches are drowned. Blasphemers are flogged. And skeptics are quickly reformed or silenced. The Inquisition isn't a distant threat. It's a very real possibility for anyone who thinks too loudly or questions too openly. Books are controlled. Ideas are monitored. Doubt is deadly. So you go through the motions. You chant. You bow. You pray that your soul, after enduring this dirt-covered life, might finally land in paradise. You light candles. You confess sins you're not sure you committed. You give money you don't have to a church that promises salvation, but delivers mostly guilt. Assuming the priest likes you, because favor matters. The priest decides who gets married, who gets buried in sacred ground, who receives communion, and who gets publicly shamed. He's your spiritual guide, your moral judge, and sometimes your worst enemy, all wrapped in one scratchy robe. In the Middle Ages, faith wasn't optional. It was survival. So you drank the water. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just stubbed your toe on a rock shaped like disappointment. Either way, you're sick. You need help. You need a doctor. Too bad you live in the Middle Ages, where medicine is really just polite torture with a theology degree. Let's start with the diagnosis. Everything wrong with you, whether it's a cough, rash, broken bone, or the creeping plague, is caused by your humors being out of balance. The four humors were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to medieval science, your health depends on keeping them balanced, like some sort of internal soup. Got a fever? Too much blood. The answer? Bloodletting. That's right. Let's drain your life force into a bowl, using a dull blade or a hungry leech. And yes, barbers were often the ones doing it. Imagine getting a haircut and a hemoglobin extraction in one sitting. 2 for 1, baby. Feeling sad or anxious? That's clearly an excess of black bile. The cure? Laxatives. Maybe a warm herbal purge. Or just prayers and a cold compress while everyone avoids eye contact with you and starts carving your coffin. Mental health in the Middle Ages was barely understood and often attributed to demonic possession or moral failing. Treatment ranged from useless to actively harmful. Now, if you break a bone or get a nasty wound, you're in real trouble. There's no anesthesia unless you count passing out from pain. Surgery is done with knives that haven't been cleaned since the Crusades. Tools are heated over fire, not for sterilization, but because they just look scarier that way. The surgeon might pray before cutting. He might not. Either way, you're screaming. Antibiotics? Centuries away. Germ theory? Not invented yet. They think disease comes from bad air called miasma, or God being annoyed with your moral failings. Got a stomach ache? Must have been your sinful thoughts. Hope you like confessing while vomiting. If your condition gets worse, you'll be treated with more leeches, possibly some crushed beetles, and a priest at your bedside giving last rites, just in case. At this point, they're preparing for the cure known as death. Treatments include potions made from herbs, animal parts, and substances you really don't want to know about. Some might help. Most won't. A few will actively make things worse. And if by some miracle you recover, everyone just assumes God took pity on you. The doctor takes full credit, and the leech gets promoted. Your survival is attributed to divine intervention, not medical skill, because honestly, medical skill had very little to do with it. Hospitals existed, but they were mostly run by religious orders and focused on spiritual care rather than physical healing. You went there to pray, not to get better. If you recovered, praise God. If you didn't, well, at least your soul was prepared. So yes, in the Middle Ages, medicine is less about healing and more about surviving the cure. You're better off avoiding injury entirely, which is nearly impossible when your job involves sharp tools, heavy loads, and animals with unpredictable temperaments. Good luck out there. Feeling thirsty? Need to freshen up? Want to splash a little water on your face to wake up from this damp fever dream of a life? Too bad. In medieval times, water isn't your friend. It's trying to murder you quietly. Let's start with drinking. The nearby stream looks fresh, bubbling, and clear like something out of a fantasy movie. But spoiler alert, it's not. Upstream, someone just dumped a chamber pot into it. And if not that, then a dead pig is probably decomposing in it. Parasites, bacteria, and the entire microbial army of medieval Europe await in every sip. That's why people drank beer. Yes, beer even children. But before you imagine medieval kids doing keg stands, understand that it was small beer, weak in alcohol, strong in survivability. Brewing boiled the water, so it was safer than whatever flowed through the town ditch. It was basically hydration with training wheels. Wine was another option, if you were rich enough to afford it and unconcerned with functioning properly before noon. Wine was safer than water, lasted longer, and came with social status. But for peasants, it was a rare luxury reserved for special occasions or medicinal purposes. What about bathing? Surely water was used for cleaning. In theory, yes. In practice, absolutely not. See, back then, people believed bathing actually opened your pores and let disease in. That's right, washing yourself was considered medically risky. You were cleaner, apparently, if you never removed the protective layer of filth caked onto your skin. Doctors advised against bathing, especially during outbreaks of plague. Communal bathhouses did exist, but they quickly gained reputations as places for gossip, scandal, and sometimes full-on medieval extracurriculars. So, naturally, the church got involved and shut many down. What remained was expensive, crowded, and not particularly hygienic. Even if you did want to bathe, it was a full production. You'd need to fetch water from the well, boil it over a fire, fill a wooden tub that leaked, and then pray no one else in the house used it before you, or worse, after. The same water might serve an entire family, getting progressively dirtier with each person. By the time it was your turn, you might actually be cleaner staying out. And rainwater? Collected in open barrels where birds poop, insects breed, and moss thrives. Sounds refreshing, doesn't it? Nothing says hydration like drinking from nature's petri dish. You'd strain it through cloth if you were careful, but most people weren't careful. They were thirsty. Rivers and wells were the main sources of drinking water, and both were contaminated regularly. Human waste, animal waste, industrial runoff from tanneries, and dye works. All of it ended up in the water supply. Outbreaks of dysentery, cholera, and typhoid were common and devastating. So, whether it's going in your mouth, on your body, or onto your crops, water in the Middle Ages is less of a life source and more of a gamble. One wrong gulp, and you're spending your final days sweating in a straw bed, clutching your stomach, and contemplating all your life choices. Next time you sip tap water, raise a glass to your ancestors. They didn't have the luxury of hydration without hazard. Now that your back is on fire from laboring in the fields, let's talk about the weather. Because in the Middle Ages, temperature is less about seasons and more about ongoing punishment from the sky. Let's start with winter. There's no insulation, no central heating, and no weather app warning you to stay inside. Just wooden walls with gaps you could throw a chicken through. Your windows? Covered with cloth, not glass. The wind whistles through like it owns the place. The fire in the hearth is nice in theory, but you don't have enough firewood to keep it going, because wood is expensive and gathering it from the forest is sometimes illegal. Yes, you can be executed for picking up the wrong stick from the wrong forest. Poaching wood was a serious crime, punishable by fines, imprisonment, or worse. So you bundle up in your one damp wool tunic, huddle near the dying embers, and still wake up with your nose frozen. Your feet permanently cold, often damp. Your fingers so stiff they feel like tiny medieval popsicles. Frostbite isn't diagnosed. It's just called bad luck. You lose a toe, you lose a toe. Life goes on or doesn't. Sleeping in winter means piling bodies together for warmth. Your entire family shares a bed, along with whatever animals fit. It's not cozy. It's survival. The straw beneath you is cold and damp. The blanket above you smells like wet sheep. But at least you're not alone. In the worst winters, people froze to death in their homes. Entire villages were buried under snow. Now, fast forward to summer. Sounds better, right? Wrong. In summer, your home turns into a clay oven. There's no fan, no cross breeze, and absolutely no deodorant. You sweat through your layers, but you can't remove them because showing too much skin is scandalous and also invites sunburn, insect bites, and social judgment. The flies are out in full force, attracted to your unwashed body and the smell of last week's goat stew still fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes buzz by your ear while you sleep, assuming you can sleep through the sound of neighbors yelling and babies crying. The heat makes everything worse. Food spoils faster. Tempers flare. Disease spreads. In the fields, the sun bakes you. No sunblock, no hat unless you fashion one out of straw, like a desperate scarecrow. And the worst part? You still have to work. Heat stroke is just called taking a bad turn. You collapse, someone throws water on you, and you get back to harvesting. No sick days, no shade breaks, just survival. So, you're either shivering in your own hovel, wondering if your toes will make it to spring, or you're sweating through your only pair of socks while your thighs chafe into oblivion. Rain means mud. Sun means burns. Wind means chill. There is no comfortable season. And the one thing that never changes, no matter the season, your clothes still itch, your food is still terrible, and your next job is still waiting. Welcome to climate control medieval style. There is none. If you thought being a medieval peasant was rough, try doing it as a woman. All the filth, famine, and fear, plus childbirth, subservience, and social invisibility. In the Middle Ages, being a woman is like being on hard mode with no health potions and no restart button. From birth, a girl's life path is pretty much locked in. Marry young, bear children, serve your husband, die tired. Education? Not likely. Unless you're from a noble family and sent to a convent, your intellectual development stops around the time you learn how to churn butter and patch a tunic. Reading and writing are reserved for men, clergy, and the occasional wealthy widow who defied expectations. For most women, the only lessons are practical: cooking, cleaning, spinning, farming. Knowledge is measured in survival skills, not books. Marriage happens early. Really early. It's not weird to be betrothed at 12 and pregnant by 14. It's not about love. It's about land, livestock, and alliances. Your opinion? Not required. Your consent? Technically needed, but easily pressured. Marriage contracts are negotiated between families. You're the goods being traded. Once married, you're basically your husband's property. Your job is to produce heirs, feed everyone, keep the house running, and not complain. Because complaining might get you branded a nag or worse, a witch. That label comes with a complimentary drowning or burning, depending on local fashion. Childbirth is a death lottery. There's no prenatal care, no sterile tools, no anesthesia. Midwives do their best, but even minor complications can mean death for the mother, the child, or both. Hemorrhage, infection, obstructed labor, all potential death sentences. Some women survive 10 pregnancies. Many don't survive 2. And each pregnancy weakens the body further. But don't worry, once the baby is out, your work increases. Now you have a screaming infant in a lice-ridden hut, and you're expected to nurse, cook, clean, and still help in the fields. You don't get a break. You are the break for everyone else. Childcare isn't a shared responsibility. It's yours alone, on top of everything else. If you're unmarried, you're suspicious. If you're widowed, you're vulnerable. If you're outspoken, you're dangerous. Women who didn't conform were often accused of witchcraft, especially if they had herbal knowledge, a strong personality, or just looked at someone funny on a rainy Tuesday. Thousands of women were executed as witches during the medieval period. Even in the church, your role is limited. Nuns lived under strict rules. No speaking without permission, no freedom of movement, and your spiritual worth was always ranked below men. Female saints were celebrated, but living women were controlled. Some women found power as abbesses, queens, or influential wives. But these were exceptions. For the average medieval woman, life was work without rest, obedience without reward, and service without recognition. In short, if you're a woman in the Middle Ages, you're expected to endure, obey, reproduce, and suffer in silence. Ideally while smiling. Because even in a time of universal suffering, women were somehow expected to suffer gracefully. So far, you've battled filth, starvation, social injustice, and possibly a goat. But just when you think your day can't get any worse, here comes violence. Loud, bloody, and often completely acceptable by medieval standards. Let's be clear, the Middle Ages were not peaceful. The idea of law and order mostly meant hope the local lord isn't in a bad mood. Violence is everywhere. In the home, in the streets, on the battlefield. Crime is common. Punishment is brutal. And justice is more performance art than protection. Steal a loaf of bread? You could lose a hand. Accused of lying? Your tongue might get pierced. Gossip too much? Meet the scold's bridle, a metal mask strapped to your head with a bar in your mouth. For correction, of course. Domestic violence? Completely normal. Husbands were allowed, even expected, to discipline their wives and children. There were limits, technically. You weren't supposed to kill them. But short of that, physical punishment was considered a husband's right and duty. Wives who fought back risked public humiliation or worse. Street fights? Commonplace. Disputes over property, insults, or drunken arguments regularly escalated to violence. Knives were common. So were clubs, fists, and whatever heavy object was nearby. There was no police force to call. You defended yourself, or you didn't. Bystanders might intervene, or they might just watch. And war? Always simmering. Local feuds, territorial disputes, religious crusades. Someone's always marching off to stab someone else in the name of honor, God, or boredom. Knights trained for combat from childhood. Peasants were conscripted when needed and discarded when not. Sieges could last months, starving entire populations. Battlefields were slaughterhouses. Let's say you're accused of something serious. Heresy, theft, witchcraft. How do you prove your innocence? By being tortured, obviously. Welcome to trial by ordeal. One version. You stick your hand in boiling water to retrieve a stone. If it heals without infection in 3 days, you're innocent. If not, you're guilty. Another option. You're tossed into a river. If you sink, you're innocent and probably dead. If you float, you're guilty and will be punished anyway. It's like a medieval game show where the prize is survival and the host is actively rooting against you. And if you're sentenced to death, that's a public event. Executions are performed in front of cheering crowds. Hangings, beheadings, burnings, drawings, and quarterings. Sometimes people bring snacks. It's the medieval equivalent of cable TV. Children attend. Vendors sell refreshments. Death is entertainment. The wealthy weren't immune to violence, but they had better protection armor, guards, fortified homes. The poor had nothing. A dispute with a neighbor could end your life. A misunderstanding with a noble could end your entire family. Violence isn't a breakdown of society in the Middle Ages. It is society. Everyone lives with the constant knowledge that life is fragile. Justice is arbitrary, and your neighbor might bash your head in over a pig. So walk carefully, keep your eyes down, and never trust anyone with a club. At this point, you've made it through the lice, the leeches, the laundry-less misery, and the looming threat of public disembowelment. But now comes the final chapter of most medieval lives, an early and unglamorous death. If you're alive and still breathing past the age of 40, you're practically a celebrity. You might even be referred to as the Old One, which is less of a nickname and more of a statistical miracle. Let's break it down. The average life expectancy hovers around 30 to 40 years, but that number is dragged down heavily by infant mortality. Nearly half of all children died before reaching age 5. Disease, malnutrition, or one bad winter was all it took. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no hope. parents expected to lose children. It was normal. It was devastating, but normal. If you survived childhood, you entered adulthood already exhausted. Work began as soon as you could walk upright, and by 25, your joints creaked like a monastery door. You might be missing several teeth, a finger, and most of your original optimism. Your body aged fast in the Middle Ages. Hard labor, poor nutrition, and constant exposure to the elements took their toll. Women faced a particularly deadly gauntlet, childbirth. It was one of the leading causes of death. No pain relief, no medical intervention, just prayer, hot water, and someone holding your hand while you bled out on a straw-stuffed cot. Midwives did their best. It often wasn't enough. Complications that modern medicine handles routinely were death sentences. For men, the dangers were different, but equally relentless. Farming accidents, infections from minor wounds, a neighbor's drunken rage, or a crusade gone sideways. Even walking to the market could be risky. If you crossed paths with a bored bandit or an angry tax collector, death could also come quietly from the plague, which turned cities into cemeteries overnight, or from famine, which could last entire seasons, thinning out entire villages, or from bad luck, like eating spoiled grain and spending your final hours hallucinating and screaming at the walls. Ergot poisoning, caused by fungus on rye, drove people mad before killing them. And funerals? You were lucky if you got one. Bodies were often buried quickly to avoid disease. No embalming, no polished coffins, just a hole, a few murmured prayers, and a shallow mound of earth, if there was enough space left in the churchyard. During plague years, mass graves were common, bodies stacked like firewood. The church promised heaven, but first you had to earn it. Confess your sins, pay your tithes, die in a state of grace. If you didn't, purgatory waited, or worse, hell. Death wasn't just physical. It was spiritual, terrifying, and final. So yes, in medieval times, life was brutal, short, and constantly under siege by death in all its casual forms. You didn't retire. You just stopped showing up. And speaking of exits, let's move on to your final chapter. You finally made it to the afterlife, or at least into the tomb. You've been embalmed, wrapped, blessed, and buried. Time to rest in peace, right? Well, not exactly. Because in medieval times, even the dead get robbed. Let's start with the simple truth. Tombs are full of expensive stuff. Gold amulets, jewelry, perfumed oils, carved statues, all intended to be taken into the afterlife. But they're also extremely tempting to the living. Grave robbery was so common, it became a full-time problem. Churches tried to fight it by placing tombs inside sacred buildings, locking crypts, and scrawling terrifying curses on the walls. Things like, "May your soul wander forever," or "May worms feast upon your eyes." Spoiler, the curses didn't work. They never do. Desperate people aren't scared of words carved in stone. Grave robbers came anyway at night, in secret, with inside knowledge. Sometimes they were locals who knew exactly where the best bodies were buried. Sometimes they were corrupt workers who helped dig the graves in the first place. In some cases, even priests and gravediggers were in on it. The church sexton who buried you might be the same man digging you up next week. And the punishment for getting caught? Severe. Think public beatings, mutilation, exile, or death. Grave robbing was considered both theft and sacrilege, crime against property and against God. But considering how valuable grave goods were, especially silver crosses, rings, and fine clothing, the risk often seemed worth it. Gold doesn't judge. Gold just gleams. After all, the dead don't fight back. They don't scream for help. They don't run to the authorities. They're the perfect victims, in a way. Silent, still, and slowly decomposing. But it's not just the wealthy who got robbed. Even commoners' graves were disturbed. Poorer folks might be buried with a small coin for passage to the afterlife, or a wooden rosary for protection. That was still worth stealing. Times were hard. Tools were valuable. And linen shrouds could be sold. The irony? Grave robbing wasn't just about greed. Sometimes it was about survival. During famines, political collapse, and wars, a hungry peasant might break into a tomb not for treasure, but for the scraps buried with the dead. Food offerings, clothing, anything useful. Morality bends when your children are starving. Bodies themselves had value too. Later in history, medical schools would pay handsomely for corpses to dissect. But even in medieval times, body parts were believed to have magical properties. Bones became relics. Hair became talismans. The dead were not at rest, they were resources. So, in medieval Europe, you're not safe just because you're dead. Your grave can be looted, your name forgotten, and your bones scattered by some desperate soul with a pickaxe and poor moral judgment. Rest in peace? Only if no one knows where you're buried. After 14 chapters of heat, hunger, sand, superstition, and backbreaking labor, it's time to ask the big question. What did medieval people do for fun? Let's be honest, options were limited. There was no Netflix, no TikTok, no doom scrolling through your ex's vacation photos. Your evenings were lit by candle or fire, and entertainment was whatever you could make with your hands, your voice, or your neighbors. Music was big. People sang folk songs, ballads, and bawdy tavern tunes that would make a sailor blush. Instruments were simple lutes, flutes, drums, and the occasional hurdy-gurdy, which sounds like a medieval robot having a breakdown. If you couldn't play an instrument, you clapped along. If you couldn't clap, you stomped. Music wasn't a performance. It was a participation sport. Everyone joined in, whether they could carry a tune or not. Storytelling was another staple. Villages had their local tale spinners, people who remembered the old legends, the ghost stories, the moral fables. You'd huddle around the fire while someone told you about dragons, cursed knights, or that one village that angered a saint and got swallowed by a sinkhole. Stories passed down through generations, changing with each teller, growing stranger and more wonderful. Games existed too, though they were rougher than modern versions. Dice, cards, and betting games were popular despite the church's constant disapproval. Chess was played by nobles, while peasants threw knives, wrestled, or chased greased pigs through the mud for sport. Yes, greased pigs. Don't ask. It was exactly as chaotic as it sounds that football existed, sort of. It involved 2 villages, 1 ball, and essentially no rules. Games could last all day and result in broken bones, property damage, and the occasional death. It was less sport and more organized riot. Authorities tried to ban it repeatedly. It never worked. Festivals and fairs offered rare breaks from work. These were loud, chaotic and full of food, drink, and questionable entertainment jugglers, acrobats, fire eaters, and the occasional bear being poked with sticks. Not exactly PETA approved, but crowds loved it. Mystery plays reenacted biblical stories with enthusiasm, if not accuracy. Puppet shows mocked local officials. Minstrels sang songs that were either romantic or filthy, depending on the audience. Drinking was a pastime in itself. The tavern was the medieval social hub. You went there to argue, gamble, flirt, and forget that tomorrow would be exactly the same as today. Ale flowed freely. Fights broke out regularly. Friendships formed over shared misery. And if none of that appealed to you, you could always attend an execution. Public punishments were spectator events crowds gathered. Vendors sold snacks, and children got a front row view of medieval justice. Entertainment in the Middle Ages wasn't polished, but it was communal, loud, and desperately needed. After a week of back-breaking labor, even a greased pig chase looked like paradise. After a long day of labor, lice, and leeches, it's finally time to eat. You shuffle back to your hovel, stomach growling, ready for the one joy left in life, a warm meal. Bad news. Your meal is probably trying to kill you. Let's begin with the basics. Food preservation doesn't really exist. There's no fridge, no freezer, just salt, smoke, or the hope that winter air keeps things fresh. Your meat, if you're lucky enough to have any, has been hanging for days, covered in flies, marinated in questionable brine, and possibly shared with a rat or two. Salting was the most common preservation method, but salt was expensive. If you couldn't afford it, you just ate things faster or hoped for the best. The taste was secondary to survival. Smoking helped too. Meats and fish were hung in chimneys or smoke huts, absorbing the flavor of whatever burned beneath. It worked, mostly. But if the fire went out or the timing was wrong, you'd end up with half raw, half-rotten protein that would fight you on the way down. Your stomach would revolt. Your body would punish you for days. Bread was the cornerstone of the medieval diet. But even that wasn't safe. In bad harvest years, desperate peasants bulked it up with bark, sawdust, or even clay to make it stretch. And if it was rye season, there was a bonus: ergot, a fungus that causes convulsions, hallucinations, and sometimes death. It's like eating bread laced with LSD and tetanus. Outbreaks of ergot poisoning were common and terrifying. Vegetables? Only if they're in season. And you know what's always in season? Turnips. So many turnips. Boiled, mashed, or floating in pottage, which, if you remember from breakfast, is basically a hot swamp of mystery ingredients simmering for eternity. Onions, cabbage, and beans rounded out the vegetable options. Fresh greens were rare and fleeting. Fruit might be available in the fall, but it rots quickly. Dairy is another gamble. Fresh milk spoils in hours without refrigeration. Butter and cheese fare better, but they're loaded with bacteria. People eat them anyway, because it's either that or chew your boot leather. Food safety isn't a concept. It's a prayer. And let's talk seasoning. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg, worth more than gold. For the average peasant, flavor comes from onions, garlic, salt if you're lucky, and pain. Most meals taste like wet burlap sprinkled with sadness. Herbs helped when available: thyme, rosemary, sage, but they couldn't mask the taste of desperation. But food isn't just a health hazard. It's a political one. Game animals belong to the Lord, not you. Caught poaching a rabbit? You could be fined, imprisoned, or even executed. The forests were the Lord's property. The deer were the Lord's property. Even the fish in the river might be off limits. That's right. Your dinner could get you hanged. So as you sit down to eat your gray stew by flickering firelight, remember, every bite is a risk. But you eat anyway, because in the Middle Ages, food doesn't nourish. It Tests You Dot Love in the Middle Ages wasn't exactly a Nicholas Sparks novel. Marriage was less about romance and more about strategic alliances, property transfers, and not dying alone. If you were a peasant, your wedding was probably arranged before you could spell your own name. Dowries were negotiated. Land was promised. And you, the bride or groom, were essentially a business transaction with bad hair. For nobles, marriage was high-stakes diplomacy. You married to unite families, secure borders, or end feuds. Love had nothing to do with it. If you happened to like your spouse, that was a pleasant surprise, not a requirement. Marriages were brokered by parents, negotiated by lawyers, and blessed by priests. The couple's preferences were largely irrelevant. Peasant weddings were simpler, but equally transactional. Your family offered what it could: a cow, some tools, a plot of land, and in return, you gained a partner to share labor and hopefully produce more laborers. Children weren't just blessings. They were workers. Every pregnancy was an economic decision. The ceremony itself was modest by modern standards. A priest would bless the union, often outside the church doors rather than inside. Guests brought food and drink. Someone played a fiddle. And by nightfall, you were expected to consummate the marriage, sometimes with witnesses nearby to verify the deed. Privacy was not a medieval concept. Your wedding night might have an audience. Divorce? Basically impossible. The church controlled marriage, and the church didn't do breakups. What God has joined, let no man separate. That was the rule, with very few exceptions. Annulments were rare and expensive, reserved for nobles, who could afford to bribe their way out or claim some technicality like consanguinity. For everyone else, till death do us part was literal, and death came fast. Widows and widowers were married quickly, not out of love, but out of necessity. You couldn't run a farm alone. You couldn't raise children alone. So you found another partner, merged households, and kept going. Second and third marriages were common. Blended families were the norm. Romance did exist, of course. People fell in love, wrote poems, and pined dramatically from a distance. But that was courtly love, mostly fictional, mostly tragic, and mostly reserved for knights and noblewomen in stories. Troubadours sang of unrequited passion. Reality was métier. For the average medieval person, love was a luxury. Marriage was survival. You learned to tolerate your spouse because you had to. You built a life together because there was no alternative. Some couples grew to love each other. Others just coexisted, bound by duty and circumstance. And if you didn't like your spouse, tough, you had a field to plow. Feelings were secondary to function. Marriage in the Middle Ages wasn't about happiness. It was about survival, duty, and the next generation. So where do you fit in medieval society? Let's be clear, unless you were born noble, the answer is near the bottom. The feudal system was a strict hierarchy, and social nobility was about as common as indoor plumbing. At the top sits the king, divinely appointed and untouchable. Below him, the lords and barons who own the land. Below them, the knights who defend it. And at the very bottom, you, the peasant, the serf, the person whose entire existence revolves around working land you'll never own for people, who'll never know your name. Serfs weren't slaves, technically. You couldn't be bought or sold, but you also couldn't leave. You were bound to the land, which meant you were bound to whoever owned it. If the lord sold the estate, you came with it, like furniture, with feelings. Your children would inherit your status. Your grandchildren, too. The system was designed to keep people exactly where they were. You owed your lord everything: labor, crops, loyalty, and silence. In return, you got protection, sort of. If raiders came, you might be allowed inside the castle walls. If they didn't, well, good luck with your pitchfork. The arrangement was called mutual obligation, but the mutuality was questionable at best. Knights were the military muscle of the feudal system. They trained for war, wore expensive armor, and swore oaths to their lords. In exchange, they got land, status, and the right to look down on everyone beneath them, which was almost everyone. Knighthood was hereditary, mostly. A peasant's son didn't become a knight. He became a peasant. The clergy had their own lane. Priests, monks, and bishops answered to the church, not the king. They were exempt from many taxes and laws, which made them powerful and sometimes corrupt. The local priest might be your spiritual guide or your worst enemy, depending on how much you tithed and how often you confessed. And merchants? They existed in a weird middle space richer than peasants, but not noble. They were tolerated, taxed, and occasionally respected, especially if they supplied something the Lord wanted. Some grew wealthy enough to rival minor nobility. Most didn't. Social climbing was nearly impossible. You were born into your role, and that's where you stayed. The rare exceptions, soldiers knighted for bravery, merchants who married into nobility, were so uncommon they became legends. For every success story, there were millions who lived and died exactly where they started. In the Middle Ages, your place in the world wasn't earned. It was inherited. And escaping it, that was the real fantasy. Dreams of better lives stayed dreams. Reality was the field, the forge, the kitchen wherever you were born to serve Dot in medieval Europe. Your relationship with animals wasn't about cuddles. It was about survival. Livestock were your refrigerator, your ATM, your alarm clock, and occasionally your coworker. Chickens provided eggs. Cows provided milk. Pigs provided fat and meat when you could afford to slaughter them. And all of them lived with you, inside your one-room house, breathing the same air. Yes, really. In many peasant homes, animals slept alongside the family. It wasn't affection, it was practicality. Body heat from livestock helped warm the house in winter. And keeping animals inside meant they were less likely to be stolen, eaten by wolves, or wandering into the neighbor's turnip patch. Your cow was too valuable to leave outside. The smell? Imagine wet hay, manure, feathers, and human sweat all simmering in a poorly ventilated mud hut. Now imagine waking up to a chicken standing on your face. That was just Tuesday. You got used to it. You had to. Pigs were particularly valuable. They ate scraps, rooted through garbage, and could be fattened for slaughter before winter. A family with a pig was doing okay. A family without one was struggling. Pigs required little care and converted waste into food. They were the recyclers of the medieval world. Cows were wealth incarnate. If you owned a cow, you had milk, butter, cheese, and something to trade. Oxen pulled plows. Horses, rare and expensive, were reserved for the wealthy. Peasants walked everywhere. A horse cost more than most families earned in a year. Sheep provided wool, which could be spun, woven, and sold. Goats gave milk and attitude in equal measure. Geese honked aggressively and produced feathers for bedding, assuming you could catch one without losing an eye. Ducks laid eggs and provided meat. Every animal served a purpose. Losing an animal was catastrophic. A dead cow could mean a winter without food. A stolen pig could end a family. Animals weren't pets. They were insurance policies with legs. You cried when they died, not just from sentiment, but from economic terror. And slaughter? It happened in autumn, before winter made feeding animals impossible. The whole village would participate, butchering, salting, smoking, and preserving every part of the animal. Nothing was wasted. Blood became sausage. Bones became broth. Intestines became casing. Hides became leather. Even the hooves were boiled for glue. Animal care was constant work. Feeding, watering, mucking out stalls, treating illnesses, all done by hand every day, regardless of weather or your own health. Animals didn't take days off, so neither could you. In the Middle Ages, you didn't own animals. You depended on them. They were family members, economic assets, and survival necessities, all rolled into one smelly, demanding package. And they depended on you not dying before they were useful. Let's say you're accused of something serious. Heresy, theft, witchcraft. How do you prove your innocence? By being tortured, obviously. Welcome to trial by ordeal. One version. You stick your hand in boiling water to retrieve a stone. If it heals without infection in 3 days, you're innocent. If not, you're guilty, and probably dead anyway. Another popular option, trial by combat. You fight your accuser or a champion if you're too weak, and whoever wins is declared right. God apparently was a huge fan of swordsmanship. The logic was simple. God would not let an innocent person lose. If you lost, you were guilty. If you won, divine justice had spoken. Then there's trial by water. You're thrown into a river. If you sink, you're innocent because the pure water accepted you. If you float, you're guilty because the water rejected your sinful body. Either way, you're soaking wet and possibly drowned. Justice served. These weren't fringe practices. They were mainstream. Church-approved methods of determining guilt. The logic? God would intervene to protect the innocent. If you suffered, you must have deserved it. Doubt wasn't allowed. Evidence was irrelevant. Faith determined fate. Punishments were public and brutal. Stocks and pillories held you in place, while townsfolk threw rotten food or worse at your head. You'd stand there for hours or days, exposed to weather, mockery, and whatever the crowd decided to throw. Flogging was common for minor offenses. Branding marked you forever as a thief or liar. And for serious crimes, hanging, burning, or the ever-popular drawing and quartering, where your body was pulled apart by horses before a cheering crowd. Prisons weren't used for long-term sentences. They were holding cells, waiting rooms for execution or trial. If you survived long enough to be released, you were probably crippled, traumatized, or both. Prison conditions were horrific, dark, damp, cold, and crawling with disease. Justice wasn't blind. It was rich, powerful, and heavily biased toward whoever owned the land. Lords could punish their serfs however they saw fit. Nobles rarely faced the same consequences as peasants. And if you had money, you could bribe your way out of almost anything. The church had its own courts for religious offenses. Excommunication cut you off from the sacraments, and theoretically, from salvation. The Inquisition hunted heresy with zeal, extracting confessions through torture and executing the unrepentant. In the Middle Ages, justice wasn't about fairness. It was about fear. The system wasn't designed to rehabilitate. It was designed to terrify. Punishments were spectacles meant to deter others. Your suffering was a public service. So keep your head down. Follow the rules. And whatever you do, don't float. Fire was everything in the Middle Ages. It cooked your food, heated your home, lit your nights, and occasionally burned your village to the ground. There were no fire departments, no smoke alarms, no extinguishers, just prayers and buckets of water. A single spark in a thatched roof house could spread to your neighbors within minutes. Every peasant home had a hearth, usually a pit in the center of the room with a hole in the roof to let smoke escape. It didn't work well. The air inside was thick, hazy, and smelled like you were being slowly barbecued. Your eyes watered constantly. Your lungs ached. But without fire, you froze. Cooking happened over open flames. Pots hung from chains or sat on metal grates. One wrong move and your dinner was in the ashes or your tunic was ablaze. Burns were common. Scars were everywhere. And infection followed fast. There was no burn unit, no skin grafts, just hope and maybe some honey smeared on the wound. Fire was also your only light source after dark. Candles were expensive, so most people made do with rushes dipped in animal fat, smoky, smelly, and dim. Reading by firelight? Only if you could read, and only if you wanted to ruin your eyesight. Most people went to bed when the sun went down. Darkness was dangerous and expensive to fight, but fire's greatest danger was its appetite. Medieval towns were tinderboxes. Buildings stood close together, made of wood and thatch. One careless candle, one wind-blown ember, and entire neighborhoods went up in flames. Major cities burned repeatedly throughout the medieval period. London, Paris, Rouen, all experienced devastating fires. Firefighting was communal chaos. Neighbors formed bucket brigades, passing water hand to hand while the flames laughed. If you were lucky, the wind shifted. If not, you watched everything you owned turn to ash. Sometimes buildings were torn down to create fire breaks. Sometimes it worked. Often it didn't. Arson was a capital offense punishable by burning alive. The irony was not lost on anyone. But the crime was considered so severe, so dangerous to the community, that the harshest punishment seemed justified. One arsonist could destroy 100 homes. Blacksmiths, bakers, and other trades that required fire were often forced to work on the edge of town. Their workshops were fire hazards, and nobody wanted them close to homes. Even so, accidents happened. Forges overheated. Ovens collapsed. Sparks flew. Fire gave life. Fire took it. In the Middle Ages, you respected the flame or you paid the price. It was the most essential tool and the most terrifying threat, often within the same breath. Just when you thought medieval life couldn't get any grimmer, along came the plague. Between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death swept through Europe like a scythe through wheat. It killed an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's population. Entire villages vanished. Bodies piled in streets. And no one, not doctors, not priests, not kings, knew how to stop it. The plague arrived on ships carried by fleas on rats. But no one understood that yet. They blamed bad air, planetary alignments, angry gods, and Jews, because scapegoating was easier than science. Persecution followed the plague across Europe. Thousands of innocent people were murdered by terrified mobs, looking for someone to blame. Symptoms were horrifying. Swollen lymph nodes called buboes appeared in the groin, armpits, and neck. They oozed pus and blood. Fever, chills, and vomiting followed. Black spots appeared on the skin as tissue died. Most victims died within days, some within hours. Families watched helplessly as loved ones rotted alive. Treatments were useless. Doctors recommended bloodletting, leeches, and sitting between two large fires to sweat out the disease. Some people drank vinegar or carried flowers, hoping to ward off the miasma, the poisonous air supposedly causing the disease. None of it worked. Physicians died as fast as their patients. The church struggled to explain why God would allow such suffering. Some priests fled their posts, abandoning their congregations. Others died administering last rites, catching the plague from those they tried to comfort. Faith wavered. If prayer couldn't stop the plague, what good was it? Flagellants roamed the streets, whipping themselves bloody to atone for humanity's sins. They believed the plague was divine punishment and that extreme penance might appease God's wrath. Authorities eventually suppressed them, but not before the movement spread across Europe. Mass graves overflowed. Gravediggers ran out of space and courage. In some cities, bodies were dumped in rivers or left in houses because no one would collect them. The smell of death hung over Europe like a fog. The social fabric tore apart. Labor shortages gave surviving peasants bargaining power for the first time. Some lords offered better wages. Others cracked down harder. Revolts followed. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England grew directly from post-plague tensions. The old order trembled. And it didn't end. Plague returned in waves for centuries 1361, 1369, and beyond. Each outbreak killed more, traumatized more, and reminded everyone that death was never far. The Black Death changed everything. It reshaped economies, religions, and governments. It planted seeds of doubt in institutions that had ruled unchallenged for centuries. And it proved one undeniable truth. Medieval life was fragile. Always had been. Always would be. So, how's your day been? You've woken up in filth, relieved yourself into a bucket, brushed your teeth with wishful thinking, nearly passed out from hunger, worked until your spine cried for mercy, scratched your way through itchy wool, prayed to not get plague, and barely dodged a public execution for owning a squirrel. Welcome to a single day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of becoming a knight? Think again. That romanticized version of the middle-aged skull-head swordsman, noble ladies in towers, heroic battles and feasts in candlelit great halls. It's a myth, polished by fairy tales and fantasy books. In truth, the medieval world was gritty, cruel, and deeply unfair. Hierarchy was everything. If you were born poor, you stayed poor. If you were born rich, congratulations, you had a better chance of surviving. But you were still one bad soup away from dysentery and a hasty burial. Even the nobles weren't immune to misery. Castles were drafty stone refrigerators, filled with fleas, smoke, and politically motivated marriages. Sure, you had a fur cloak and a goblet of wine, but also a 50% chance of dying in a skirmish or from an infected splinter. The simpler times weren't simple. They were relentless. Everything took longer. Everything hurt more. Everything from childbirth to chewing cane with consequences. Life was survival, not leisure. And if you did find a quiet moment to think, to dream, to imagine something better, there wasn't much you could do with it. No upward mobility, no modern medicine, no internet to Google, what is this weird rash? You lived, suffered, worked, and died within a 10-mile radius of where you were born. Your world was small. Your options were smaller. But here's the wildest part. Through all of this, people still laughed. They sang songs, told stories, fell in love, and found meaning. Not because life was easy, but because humans are stubborn like that. Even in the darkest chapters, they made space for light. They celebrated festivals. They raised children. They built cathedrals that took generations to complete. Medieval people weren't victims passively accepting their fate. They worked, they struggled, they loved, and they hoped. They created art, music, literature. They passed down traditions that shaped the world we live in today. So tonight, when you slip into your clean bed with indoor plumbing, antibiotics, and central heating, maybe say a quiet thank you to the modern world and to your ancestors who fought rats, famine, and feudalism so you wouldn't have to. Because history may be gross and terrifying, but it's also proof that people are stubborn, hopeful, and kind of ridiculous. And that's something worth remembering. So tonight, as you tuck into your clean bed with hot water and indoor plumbing, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to your ancestors who survived lice, leeches, and soup that might kill you. Because history may be gross and terrifying, but it's also proof that people are stubborn, hopeful, and kind of ridiculous. Through plague and famine, through war and winter, through endless toil and early death, humanity kept going. They didn't just survive. They built. They created. They dreamed. Think about what they endured so you could be here, warm and safe, listening to this story. The backbreaking labor in frozen fields. The children they buried. The prayers they whispered in dark churches. The hope they carried despite everything telling them hope was foolish. They never saw antibiotics or central heating. They never knew clean water or painless dentistry. They lived their whole lives within walking distance of where they were born, never imagining the world we take for granted. And yet, they laughed around fires. They sang songs that still echo in our music. They told stories that became the legends we know today. They loved fiercely, even knowing love meant loss. They built cathedrals they'd never see completed, planting seeds for generations they'd never meet. So as your eyes grow heavy and sleep begins to pull you under, carry with you this simple truth. You are the dream they never dared to dream, the comfort they never knew, the future they worked and suffered and died for. Rest now, you've earned it. And somewhere across the centuries, a medieval peasant exhausted, cold, and covered in mud would give anything to trade places with you. Sweet dreams. And thank you for listening.